Hi there, and welcome to AXA XL Arctic Live. We're here in Neolesund, the northernmost permanent settlement in the world, and we're at the UK Arctic Research Station. And hello to all those classes watching. We have classes from Ireland, USA, Colombia, Bermuda, and Germany. Fantastic to have you with us. Now, we are high in the Arctic. We are halfway between the top of Norway and the North Pole. We're on an island called Svalbard, and that is where the UK Arctic Research Station is. Now, this live broadcast is an Arctic Q&A with myself and Ellie, and so we'll be answering all your questions on Arctic science and Arctic life over the next 45 minutes, and it's amazing to have you with us. Just before we get started with your questions, we are going to give you a little bit of a show around so you can see where we are, and I'll describe the location and some of the features we can see from the research station here. So without further ado, I'm going to grab my mic and see if Ellie's ready to brave the cold outside. I think the wind's died down, so hopefully it won't feel too chilly out there. And we'll go out and have a look around the wonderful world of the Arctic. Glorious weather at the moment. And you can see, looking down here, just some wonderful views. The settlement at Neolesund was started off as a coal mining settlement, but is in one of the most spectacular locations, I think, in the world. So the dark water there you can see is a Kongsfjorden. A fjord is the Norwegian for a sea inlet, and that's where the sea comes in past the research settlement here, from the sort of North Atlantic, Arctic Ocean. Looking down, you can see maybe some icebergs down towards that bluff at the head of the fjord, and that's where some of what we call the inner fjord sampling sites are. So that's probably 10 kilometers, another sort of 5 kilometers on to the front of the glacier you can see there. And that glacier is the Kronebreen, an incredibly fast moving glacier, 3 meters a day in these current sort of spring months, and up to 6-7 meters a day in the summer. Now, any icebergs that we face out in the fjord are blocks of ice coming off the front of that glacier. It's amazing to sort of think that is 15 kilometers away. You can almost reach out and touch it. And even more amazing for me is to think that those pyramidal peaks, part of the Tre Krona, the Three Crowns, are a further 15 kilometers away. So that's another sort of 25-30 kilometers from where we are. And it's incredible, clear Arctic air. It's a spectacular part of the world to be doing our sampling. And what we're interested in at the moment is the ocean chemistry, the plankton, and the plastics that might be found in this fjord. So we've been taking samples to test for ocean acidification, that's changes in the ocean chemistry, to find the plankton that's living here. So there's the tiny animals that make up the bottom of the food chain in the ocean, and also to find out if there's any plastic in these waters and what depth it might occur at. Looking down this way, we are not intense when we are up here at the moment. We are living in a research station, and Neolesund is a collection of research stations from 10 different countries. That's sort of Norway, Germany, France, Italy, the Netherlands, UK, South Korea, Japan, China, and India. And all those different countries, and indeed researchers from other countries as well, make up the research community here. We have a central dining hall, and going there is really a United Nations of people looking to explore this remote but fragile environment, find out how it's changing, and inform our actions and behaviours back at home. Now, when we're up here, we each have our own bedroom. Those are the first windows that you can see on the slightly raised part of the station, going past our porch or entry area. Beyond that, we have a living room, lab space, computer space, and all the facilities that we need to be able to explore the Arctic environment safely. Now, just turning round and looking back again, on a day like today with calm air, without a wind up, with the sun out, it can look like it's a very easy environment to explore. On our first sampling day, we're in fact having icebergs blown into our path, minus 25 with wind chill, equipment freezing. The sampling bottles froze solid as soon as they got out on deck, and we're having to use a kettle on board the boat to melt these sampling bottles so we can actually get the samples out, collect them, and bring them back to the station. So it can be a fairly epic environment to explore in. The team have just gone back from the last sampling day, so there's some minuses insofar as that the conditions are still pretty harsh out on the outer fjord, finding that we have a ripped plankton net for the second day in a row. And but the plus point, not great for data, but for the excitement of the scientists involved, Carrie and Clara, was they spotted a blue whale in the outer fjord, which is a great treat to be able to see the world's largest animal ever in the waters up here. So I'm just going to clip this back on. Stand here. Really wonderful to get these questions. We've got a shout out just to give out before we start, and that is to Miss Jen's class at the International School Ruhr in Essen, Germany. So wonderful to have you back with us. I think it was a different class from the previous session. Really, really great to have you. So big wave to all the students there. We'll start off with a few questions coming in from the International School. We've got the first off is we've got what is the warmest temperature it gets to in the Arctic, and does your gear and housing keep you warm enough? Great question. In terms of the warmest temperature in the Arctic, I'm not sure for the whole Arctic, but for Svalbard, the island, the archipelago where we are at the moment, the warmest temperature is sort of just over 20 degrees. I think it's about sort of nearly 22 degrees Celsius, and that was in 1979. And of course, you do get these natural fluctuations in temperature over the years. I think what's probably most worrying is that for Kongsfjorden, the area where we are now, the temperature anomaly, so that's a difference between the current temperatures we're experiencing and the average or the normal temperature, is that for this year it is just under 7 degrees. So it is 7 degrees warmer at the moment over the past 30 days than the long-term average. So definitely the sense of a warming Arctic, and also the sense of a wetter Arctic. So more rain coming earlier in the season, even in sort of times like January and March. So it is getting warmer here, and the Arctic is predicted to be one of the fastest warming areas of the planet over the coming decades. So definitely on the front line of climate change. Some of the evidence that we've seen for that up here is the sort of retreating glaciers, and also the fact that there is very little sea ice here at the moment, and certainly in years gone by we would have had sea ice out in the fjord at this time of year. And Ellie's got everything set up behind the camera. I think you can come and join. Hi Ellie, welcome.
Hello.
Welcome
Hi,
from behind
everyone.
the camera. Just talking about the warmest temperatures and everything else. But the second part of that question was around gear and housing, and whether that keeps us warm enough.
Oh, good question. Yes, we're very lucky here because we're hosted by the UK Arctic Research Station. So you saw the building from the outside. We're in the garage of that building at the moment, and the bedrooms and the kitchen and sort of labs and study areas are just behind the camera. And this is toasty warm because we've got central heating, we've got hot water. So when you're inside, it's the same as living at home. You can have normal showers and cups of tea, and you can be all snuggly. In terms of gear for going outside, we've got to have some specialist gear, especially from the boat. So there's quite a big difference between dry cold and wet cold. Dry cold, if you're wearing padded clothes, you've got some nice insulated gear, you can kind of make yourself warm and just protect yourself from the elements. But wet cold is quite different, isn't it?
I mean, it's very different. It's the sort of kind of cold that gets into your bones, much like if you're in the UK or probably parts of Europe, where it's that sort of damp cold.
Yeah.
And then when you've got the wind chill and the ambient temperature playing in, and you're working with seawater on a rocky boat, and the water's freezing, the deck's slippery, you're having to have seawater which is down to sort of minus 1.5, 1.6 degrees Celsius, and that running over your hands the whole time, and having to wear thin gloves at the same time, because you're not just out there, you're actually getting samples and working.
Yeah.
So does the gear keep us warm enough? Yes, none of us have had hypothermia or frostbite.
It does keep us warm enough if and when we're wearing it properly. But of course, as you said, if you're working, if you're having to screw bottles onto water samples, or you're having to fix fiddly bits of netting and that kind of thing. For me, as a filmmaker, having to hold a camera, I need to have mobility in my fingers, so I can wear a couple of layers of gloves, but I can't wear big fat mittens that would really protect me, because I have to keep my fingers free. So holding a metal camera with only a thin layer can be a little bit cold. But in between filming, you just put on big, thick wool gloves again and warm up again.
So not too cold. We haven't had any cold injuries this time out.
No.
But certainly the Arctic does get cold enough to be fairly severe, and plenty of people do get frostbite, hypothermia, and other cold injuries.
And you've had frost nip, haven't you?
I've had frost nip, mainly on my end of my nose. Actually, goes my end of my nose goes, and you get that sort of waxy feeling as your skin freezes.
You've described it as being like raw chicken.
Well, not quite like raw chicken. When you get that chicken out of the, if you've got it frozen and you're defrosting it, it's that sort of slightly crunchy, because it's frozen, crunchy but soft, rubbery, soft, crunchy chicken on your face.
On your face.
Is your face, rather than slapping bits of, meat on your face. That's how it feels.
But down at those really, really cold temperatures, minus 40, minus 50, minus 60, you've got a matter of seconds of, if you have exposed skin, if you take a glove off, or your nose is out, or you've missed a little section that's not quite covered up, you've got, say, 30 seconds before the...
I think you can definitely feel it going. I did actually feel my nose going. My nose just went. But you just get and everything's much more methodical. So you're just taking a lot of care, describing sort of you taking gloves off to change something. You take your mitts off, you put it down on snow, and you put it down with the top of the glove facing into the wind, so you don't get your glove full of snow as it's lying on there. You put a weight on it, you take the other one off, put a weight on it, then you do whatever you're doing, and then slowly, very carefully. Because if you lose your mitts, then
you're in trouble.
It's
all very slow and steady and routine, almost a bit like when you watch people working in space and they're all sort of in slow motion. That's because they've got no gravity. But it's the same sort of thing when you see Arctic people working. They're doing it all very slowly, very precisely, very methodically. There's no quickly, grab that tool and quickly do something and throw it on the ground and grab another tool. Everything has its place, so you don't lose it in the snow, but also so that you can get things on and off, get clothes on and off.
If you put anything in the snow, then that's pretty well gone up.
Might not ever find it again.
No. So next question, on a very practical basis, how do we get to the research base? How do we get up here?
Yeah, good question. So it's the normal journey, without any flight delays or any problems, is 3 flights normally from the UK. So you'd have to fly into Norway, so normally Oslo, and that's on a regular plane. And then from Oslo up to Svalbard, there's a town called Longyearbyen, which is the northernmost sort of publicly accessible town that tourists can go to. Anybody can go and visit there. That's on a slightly smaller plane. And then from Longyear up to Ny-Ålesund, that's scientific research only, so you have to have a special permit and a special visa to access this particular site, and that's then on a little plane, and that's amazing because that flies over the glacier and over the wilderness. It's a really fun journey. That's a good one.
Yeah, every seat's a window seat.
Every seat's a window seat. Get some cracking views from that plane. This trip we came via Tromsø as well. We had an additional stop in Tromsø. We had a bit of a diversion. And the flights into Ny-Ålesund, into this research base, there's 2 a week, Mondays and Thursdays. There's a flight in and a flight out, which makes you feel a little bit remote, and everybody gets very excited when a flight comes in to see who's the new people arriving, and it means that the shop is going to be restocked with chocolate and we can get our snacks and that sort of thing. Of course, it means if there's bad weather on one of those days, if it's bad weather on the Monday or the Thursday, the flight doesn't come, and then it's another week until the next flight. So you could have a couple of weeks of bad weather and end up feeling quite remote and quite isolated up here.
And then in terms of our food, you mentioned, the chocolate in the shop, but we do not survive on chocolate alone.
No. We're again very lucky here because, as Jamie said earlier, this is an international research site. So we've got lots of different nations, and all the different research stations will all meet in our wonderful canteen. I think it's got the best view in the world of any canteen. I challenge you to take a photo of your school canteen view. Maybe somebody's got one with a nice view of the park or lake or something at their school if they're lucky. But this canteen, maybe we'll take a photo of it and put it up on Twitter.
Well, it's the same view that we just showed you.
It's basically that view.
Big glass windows.
Absolutely incredible. And the food is amazing. We've got a chef up here who is wonderful. And they work magic because, of course, they get a flight, or often the food is shipped in. So they'll get bulk quantities of tinned fruit and vegetables and potatoes and rice and that sort of thing. And they've got to make meals for lots of people from all the different countries, and they've got to make 3 meals a day with variety as well, because when you're on expedition, food takes on an extra special importance. Your next meal is a treat, it's something to look forward to. It also breaks up the day because it's 24 hours daylight here, so without sort of meals to look forward to and to help you structure your day, you might get a bit lost and you just end up sort of snacking all day. So it's important to have a sit down meal. And I think they do a brilliant job here.
They do a very good job. So the basics of how our food gets here is that there is a sort of monthly, or sort of every so often a ship comes in, and as Ellie was saying, that will bring the bulk of food, frozen food, and dried foods, and that's what we eat most of the time. And then on the plane, mainly apples at the moment. We get an apple a day each as a bit of fresh
fruit and vegetables is sort of rationed to make sure there's enough to go around, which is fair enough. Yeah,
so an apple a day keeps the doctor away, and is all you're allowed if you're in the Arctic. So there we go. Great also to say that we have students from Union Point Academy. Hi there. And INEM in Columbia are watching
Brilliant.
too.
Hi guys, thanks for joining.
There. Great, I met your teacher earlier this year, in the Colombian teacher, at a conference.
Brilliant.
In the UK, so it's great to finally meet. So we have what time of year is the best time to visit the Arctic?
Oh, that's a great question. Who's that from?
That is from the International School.
Great question. It depends what you like, really, and it depends what you want to be doing, what you need to be doing up here. So the majority of work up here is scientific research, data collection. Will be carried out when it's daylight. It makes most sense to be doing your work when the visibility is good. So the summer season is very, very popular. A lot of people coming up from about now through to when it gets dark again in September, October. So 24-hour daylight, there's a lot of work going on. It's quite a busy season. There's also people coming up and hiking and skiing and doing all sorts of things. Over the winter, it's 24 hours of darkness, so there's not so many people up here. People tend to kind of go into their cabins and hibernate and just snuggle away and get on with a lot of work in between the research seasons. So maintenance and cleaning and repair of the vehicles and the boats. So the maintenance team work really hard throughout the winter here. I think this sort of time of year is a really good time to come up because it's 24 hours sunlight, but you still get, the sun's still quite low. So in the peak of the summer, the sun sort of just goes in a circle above your head, and it stays pretty bright, really bright light all day. Whereas at the moment the sun's quite low, so it kind of goes around the horizon, and you don't get a sunset, but you get that nice colour of light as the sun's sort of dusky colour or dawn type of colour. As a filmmaker and photographer, that's the best kind of light because you get really nice contrast on the mountains, and it's quite a beautiful light. So I think probably now. What do you think? When's the best time?
I've been in the Arctic sort of between sort of March, April, May. So I haven't been here sort of earlier and sort of over the winter or later in full summer. March is quite amazing because you get the aurora, which is just spectacular, the northern lights. And then I do quite like late April as well, as you go from you have when you have the first day of 24-hour sunlight, and you get a few more solar phenomenon, and you get sort of more common to see sun columns and sun dogs. You can have a look at these online.
If you don't know what a sun dog or a sun column is, ask your teacher to Google it, and maybe the office can put some links, because it's a really unusual light phenomenon, a bit like a rainbow, where light is bending all over the place because of the angle that we're so far north. So have a Google of those, because they're pretty cool, and they're good at that time of year.
And they're good at that time of year when the sun's lower on the horizon. You get the sort of sun not set, which is quite good. And I also like it when it's a bit colder.
Yeah.
You get this sort of weird. And my first Arctic trip, we had average temperatures of sort of 35 below, and there's a certain when your beard freezes, of course, it's sort of not for everybody, but you get the sensations around your face and everything else where you feel
feels proper Arctic.
Feels proper, and you get the sort of those sensations back again on a sort of dry cold, and it's easier to get around on Skidoo. And if you're exploring an ice cave, it's less likely to collapse on your head.
That's true.
So colder temperatures are good
and
for that.
And it's drier. So actually, if it's minus 20 or minus 30 degrees, the only real problem is the cold, and you can counteract that by having the right gear and the right warm clothing and that sort of thing, because it's dry and the snow is consistent and stable, and everything sort of stays still and nothing really changes. So you kind of go out, and then it's just a day-to-day case of what the weather's doing, if there's a blizzard or not. But now, from now onwards, we're starting to get melting, and the temperature hovers around 0. So when it goes above 0, you maybe get some rain, you get some melt, and then it drops down below 0 and everything freezes, and then it melts and freezes and melts and freezes. So you get layers of ice. It means that sometimes it's slippy and mushy outside, sometimes it's really icy, and that's very difficult. So it's a lot more difficult to plan and to kind of go about your day. And as you said, one of the main things is getting around on skidoos, because once you get into this transitional springtime period, you don't have that nice, lovely snow to zip around very easily. It's a lot more trudging through slush and sludge. So yeah, maybe a little bit earlier is
a bit earlier. How is it difficult to communicate with the rest of the world, Ellie?
Another good question. As you can see, we're communicating live with you right now, so it's definitely possible. It takes a little bit of preparation, and there's a whole pile of cables behind the camera that you can't see. We do have internet here, so we have fibre optic cable that was put in quite recently, so that's really useful, because that means we can connect to you. You may see every now and then the video feed buffers a little bit, it sticks. And it crackles, and maybe there's a little bit of a delay. That's because although we've got a fibre optic cable, it's coming under the sea across from Norway. It's an awful long way to come, so there's still going to be a bit of a distance to get to you. Before we had that cable, it was VHF radio here, and it was a lot more remote and much more difficult. One thing we should say is that because this is a scientific research station, there is some really important work going on using magnetic waves, looking at the magnetic fields in this part of the world. And because of that, there are some really sensitive scientific instruments on this base. So that means we can't use Wi-Fi, we can't use Bluetooth, We can't connect wirelessly. Even a wireless mouse, can't use that. So everything has to be cabled in. That can be a bit of a problem. As you may have seen when we went outside, Jamie had to carry his microphone with a cable. I had the cameras attached by cable. So you do feel a little bit plugged in, and you have to be stationary when you're connected. But other than that, it's not bad for the Arctic to have this level of connectivity.
Not bad. And does that mean you can keep in touch with people at home as well?
Yeah, so it's not all the time. So you don't have, back in the UK, you might have your phone near you and it's constantly connected to 4G or Wi-Fi. And we don't have either of those here. So the only way to connect would be to plug in to the Ethernet cable. So that means you sort of plug in your phone once or twice a day and have a bit of a checkup and get all your notifications through. But we have a phone line here to phone home, and you can connect and Skype with friends and family and say hi. So yeah, it's definitely more disconnected than being in London, for example. But I quite like that because you're not bothered constantly. Your phone's not constantly buzzing. You sort of check in every now and then and find out what's going on.
Probably sort of normal for a number of years ago rather than always on.
More
culture.
Similar to 10 years ago, I guess. It's quite nice. But we certainly can find out, for example, if something happened in the news, we would know about it maybe a few hours later than the rest of the world, but we'd find out and then we'd be able to go online and read the latest information.
And if the weather is horrible outside and it's too bad to go out, and we had that on Saturday when the wind was up and we couldn't get out to the Arctic fjord and the sea state was just far too rough. I mean, how do we pass the time?
Good question. So there's several different things to do here again, because we're all living in the same base. So we've all got sort of our bedrooms are all in the same dorm area, and then we've got a little living room. Firstly, there's a lot of scientific data that needs to be processed. So if you're feeling like it, if it's a wet weather day, sometimes that can be quite frustrating as a scientist, because you want to be going out there and getting your data. So at least you can process the data that you got the previous day. And that means, maybe transferring into different sample bottles, taking some measurements, taking some readings, making sure everything's labeled, writing up any observations, storing and preparing your samples to be shipped back home to university. So you can always be busy working. For me, I can be busy editing and filming around the base. But then in your free time, sometimes you might be all day and you've finished what you needed to do. Games of cards, always really popular, sitting around playing board games, telling stories. And again, because we've got that lack of connectivity, it's quite nice here because people tend to actually tell stories rather than watching Netflix or connecting online and watching a sports game or something like that. And Nick Cox, who is the station manager, his interviews are already online on the Encounter website and on our YouTube channel. So do go back and find them and watch them. He's the station manager. He's got 40 plus years of experience in the Arctic. And he is the master storyteller, and his stories keep us entertained for hours.
No, so it is really nice. I mean, I think we were doing some dancing on ice.
Yes. Yeah. So the team here are studying lots of different types of plankton, and we wanted to figure out a way to show the different types of copepod, isopod, tetrapod. These are all different types of little tiny creatures that are in the seawater. And so the team have developed a plankton dance, which we're going to get on the Twitter and share with you shortly. So we were outside, just out here actually, having a bit of a dance around and being different copepods. So I think we just went a bit mad with being stuck indoors all day and ended up wanting to get outside and go dancing. But again, you can go out for a ski, you can take the skidoo out up onto the mountain, you could even sort of do a hike up here. You can take kayaks out onto the fjord, but normally if you're indoors, if you're not able to do your science, it's because the weather's really bad. So that means it's kind of too bad to go out and do fun things as well. So it could be that the sea conditions are too bad to go out, so you can't go out on the boat, but you could have a day out on land and maybe get out and go explore up in the hills instead.
Definitely. Question from INEM. Santiago would like to know what challenges researchers have to cope with to collect their data.
Lots. lots of challenges. So just a couple of examples from this last week with our team being out. Firstly, as we've just said, the weather. Sometimes you just can't get out at all, and that can be really frustrating because you've come all the way up here and aren't able to get any data. So that to combat that, you generally just plan twice as long as you need. So you could potentially get all the data you needed in, say, 3 or 4 days on the boat. So you would plan 2 weeks and expect to have 10 days on the boat, with the assumption that half of those days will probably be too choppy or too rainy or windy. And of course that was the case. We missed a couple of days last week and this weekend, and then we've had a couple of days extra to go out. Another challenge is the equipment failing at this temperature. So when it gets really cold, especially if you're in the sea out on the boat, things can freeze. Anything that's plastic can shatter. Things get degraded or become very stiff and unusable. Things break very easily. So we've had 2 nets burst and tear already. So these are big trawl nets that are dragged along behind the boat to collect surface water, or they're dropped down very deep and then dragged up through the water column to get the water samples at depth. And in these conditions where it's really icy, really choppy seas, those nets can just tear apart. So unfortunately that means you can't then finish your sample. You have to bring the boat in and try and replace or repair the net. So that can be a real challenge, because that could be a whole day sampling ruined if your net breaks. What other? Getting the kit up here. So some of the fixing solutions, like the formaldehyde that we need to preserve the samples, has to be flown up in a particular shipment, and sometimes that gets delayed or doesn't arrive.
I've got no idea where. I mean, somewhere.
It's somewhere on the way.
Somewhere between the UK and the Arctic, there is a batch of formaldehyde. Hopefully, it's reached here.
On its way.
But I think we're borrowing some formaldehyde. Yeah. Of course, people up here have spare formaldehyde knocking around.
Sometimes you do end up sort of going around to the other research stations and asking to borrow bits of equipment, or helping each other fix nets, or helping each other repair winches on the boat, that sort of thing. So it's when something goes wrong here, you're on your own, so you all have to kind of muck in and try and help. And then personal challenges. If the seas are really bad, we might have some of the crew, some of the scientists that suffer from seasickness, and that's awful when you've got data to collect and you're just not feeling.
Well, this coming and flopped on the sofa, having had the last sampling day, saw a blue whale, bonus, but they're on the sofa and they're still bouncing up and down, having been out at sea in quite a bouncy sea, so they've come back and they're sort of still bouncing up and down, having chocolate and tea before going and sorting some of the samples.
And also on that same line, I think as a scientist, you're always wanting to go out and get data. You're wanting to kind of do as much as you can while you're up here. You're not here for very long, and it's such a valuable experience. Quite often you tend to push yourself. But I think one of the biggest challenges is accepting that you can just do less here. You just can't do as much. And even yesterday, we all went out on the boat, and it wasn't even that long of a day because our net broke and we ended up coming back in a bit early, and we were all exhausted. It's something about the cold weather, the fresh air, really bumpy conditions, and you might have plans to stay up late and get some data processed or do some extra work, but you've got to listen to your body. And if you just get back and you're thinking, I'm still swaying a bit from the sea, I'm still feeling a bit wobbly, actually lie down, a cup of tea and a bit of a rest. Otherwise you burn out quite quickly.
Yeah.
Especially here with 24 hours daylight, it's quite tempting to think, we'll stay out late, because you never have to be back before it gets dark. You could technically stay out sampling till 3 a.m. if you wanted to.
Yeah.
So it's quite important that we do keep to a routine, try and go to bed early, try and eat healthily, sleep well, because I think you can suffer from exhaustion up here.
Definitely. Question now through from International School is what happens if you have a big medical emergency?
Yeah, so there's several processes in place. This research station's been operating for many, many years, so they're very well experienced. They've got really good systems. If it's something that you're feeling a bit unwell, then you can phone through to the doctor down in Longyear and they can prescribe over the telephone. So there's a locked medical cabinet here which we can't access because it's prescription only, but they're allowed to kind of give permission over the phone, and then somebody who's authorised with the key can give you those drugs. So that's quite good. Next stage, if you're really bad, the doctor might fly up here on the next flight, or if it's an emergency, in a helicopter or a special flight, to see you. And if they think you need to be seen treated in hospital, you then fly back down, and you could fly to Longyear. If it's really bad, you'd fly on to Tromsø, and then from there, back home or wherever you need to get to. Obviously, those processes are in place, and phone calls are made and communication happens, and you could get to a hospital relatively quickly if there was a real emergency. Of course, if the weather's bad, those are not an option anymore. So you are sort of stuck up here if it's bad weather. There are people on site who are medically trained in sort of field emergency or polar medically trained. So we've heard stories of people doing removing appendixes on kitchen tables in emergencies. Yeah. You've got some stories from the Antarctic, haven't you?
Well, I mean, there's just stories from various places, but I think shareable stories are there's a doctor in a Russian station, and we were showing the video the first time I went to the Arctic, and I think it was in the 50s or 60s, and he was overwintering, and that means when you spend the winter in the dark in a station, and there's no way that anybody can get to you, so you're there for months at a time.
And says, see you in 6 months.
So he was there. He's sort of got appendicitis, and no one else on the station could operate, so he had to operate on himself. And he had to brief. He had some form. He had to brief. After I've done this, please, then just, this is how you administer the knockout stuff. But he performed an appendix removal on himself using a mirror. So someone was holding a mirror, and he took his own appendix out. So we haven't got to that stage
Not yet.
But we all monitor the emergency channel, so channel 16. So we have radios, and there's quite a lot of chatter coming through. And if there were an emergency, then you would call on channel 16 rather than our own UK research station channel, and use it calling 16, calling anyone on 16, and then you describe what was going on. And you have to say, we are in the Ålesund, or we're out on the boat, and such has happened, and we need anybody to come and help. And then the whole system from the sort of north of Norway upwards would spring into action, and there'd be a sort of an international effort if there were a true emergency to come and sort it out. So that's Coast Guard boats, helicopters, anything that could possibly.
There might be a boat offshore that can divert and come and help. They might have some equipment on board that could help.
So there's that's what would happen in a medical emergency. What countries have research stations here? And that's from Irina.
You've got the list. Jamie's good at this list.
So I can do it quite fast now.
Okay.
Norway, Germany, France, Italy, Netherlands, UK, Japan, South Korea, India, China.
Nice, well done.
Yes. Been practicing all week to say that. But
so 10 different countries.
That doesn't mean that those are the only countries that are represented up here. So we'll have, I've worked here with Danes, Swedes, and Austrians as well. And it really is and research necessarily is an international endeavor, because you need experts from all these different countries to start to tackle some of these big scientific and environmental questions. Are the recipes here at the canteen in the dining hall reflective of the countries around the station, or are they closer to Norwegian or Arctic recipes? That's a good question.
That's a great question. It's a bit of both. As I said earlier, we've got a great chef here, or team of chefs up here. So I'd say the majority of the food is sort of Norwegian. We've got some really nice. There's fish. There's a lot of pickled vegetables, beetroot gherkins, lots of fish and meat. There might sometimes be reindeer on the menu. lots of seafood's the main thing. But then we also have, I guess you'd call it continental breakfast. So we have cereal, yogurt, cheese, some fresh fruit. What else? We had a curry last night.
Yep, very nice curry. I think it's what you can. It's the kind of food that you can make out of frozen
things.
frozen things, which is a particular kind of cuisine, and it's also quite hearty. So in terms of Arcticness, it's the heartiness and the calories of it.
Stodgy.
And it's, if you've been out in the field all day, you just need to sort of energize with a big hearty supper. But in terms of Norwegian flavors, it doesn't feel particularly Norwegian. But it does. I mean, apart from
European,
really. European high calorie northern stodge, which is
potatoes
amazing.
And stew and beans, and it's good. Very good food.
From INEM, Natalia would like to hear Ellie talk about her experience as a woman in science and science communication.
Brilliant question, Natalia. Thank you. Yes, it's something that I'm very proud of and very very keen to. I'm very proud to be a role model, or to be on screen and to be representing women in science. But we've got a phenomenal team here. We've got an all-female team here this year with some great scientists. So Hannah and Clara's interviews have already gone out, and we've got Kerry Lewis tomorrow.
And we've got their profiles on the site.
Exactly, so you can look them up. I studied typically male-dominated sciences as well, so that's things like the geology, volcanology, even oceanography to some degree, although there's now more women in oceanography. And polar research historically was more male-dominated. Now there are some fantastic women coming up through the ranks, which is really good to see. So when I was at university, definitely there weren't nearly as many girls studying as boys. But I didn't really care. It never really, it never made me stop and think. I'm very lucky that my mum always encouraged me to do whatever I wanted, and never, I was always taught and inspired and encouraged to do anything I wanted. So I never saw it as a barrier. And so now I feel that it's something, I feel very importantly in making sure that other young girls and women don't see it as a barrier, and that they see people like us on screen, so that they see people that, young girls see somebody that like themselves and realise that they can do it too. There aren't really any differences in how you approach the science. We can still come up here, we can do the data collection, we're all fit and strong and have to carry lots of heavy gear, and we all brave the cold just the same as the men. So I don't see it as being a barrier. But that's because I've been very lucky, and I hope that you in your schools and your environments are equally lucky and encouraged. And we need lots and lots of awesome girls in science and STEM subjects, technology, engineering and maths as well, to follow on through and carry on the brilliant work of people like Dr. Kerry Lewis and Clara and Hannah, who are doing their PhDs.
Amazing, and some great examples and inspiration there for Natalia and others watching. Does having, with the second part of the question wasn't just about science, but science communication, how important is it to have a female voice in how we communicate the science?
I think it's very important, again, for those same reasons, for 50% of the people watching are young girls and young women, and it's important that they hear things and they see these messages from people realizing that they can do the same. Science communication always needs more women, so do sign up. It's a great career. I'll be talking a little bit more about that on Wednesday.
Yeah.
So do get your questions in for filmmaking, science communication, that kind of thing. I think it's nothing against men. It's something we need 50-50. But I think that the people that we see on screen should be representative of population. So we do need, minority representation. We need female representation, people from all different backgrounds. And I didn't have any female role models on screen when I was growing up. I had my mum as a very, very strong female role model for me. If I hadn't had her, I don't know
Didn't Jane Goodall come across your horizon?
I did like Jane Goodall, but she wasn't as big or as popular or celebrated as a lot of the male heroes and figures in adventure, in science, in communication, in film, in documentary. And just from a personal point of view, in documentary filmmaking, there weren't any female documentary filmmakers when I was younger that were well known and celebrated and published as widely. So yeah, I was very lucky because my mum was such an inspiration to me and still is. Otherwise, at school, for example, we didn't see many videos when you're shown, in geography class and you're shown a video. The voiceover, the narrator, or the presenter was quite often male. So I think it's good now that there's content putting out there, and I'm proud to be part of that. So that when you're sitting in school watching the screen, you're seeing and hearing female voices. I think that is important.
Yeah, and I think in particular as well. I mean, we talk about those presenters from videos when we were at school. I don't think they were particularly relatable to a young person in any sense.
Exactly. It's not just about being male or female. It's about being from a background that people recognize that you were probably a teenager once as well, and that you've been through the same process and the same system. Certainly, if I'd watched this show as a young 12, 13-year-old, and I'd watched somebody like Clara or Hannah or Kerry,
I'd have had exactly the same career.
Well, no, maybe I would. I maybe would be a marine scientist. I would have been so inspired by seeing somebody like that talking about their work in the Arctic, and I would have said, I want to go and do that. So I think it is very powerful, and well done you for asking that question, and hope to see you in the field in a few years' time.
Very sadly, that's all we have time for.
Oh no. Great questions as always.
Really good questions. We have ocean acidification live investigation coming up in an hour's time. We also have another expert interview with Hannah Green in about 3 hours' time. Then we are back tomorrow with a focus on plastics. We have expert interviews with Dr. Kerry Lewis. We are doing a little live investigation on sampling for microplastics, and also we are back with the opportunity to ask Ellie more questions in an Arctic Q&A. And then on Wednesday we are looking at some sea level rise. We have adventure science with Ellie, so 2 expert interviews there, and Arctic Q&A as well. So until the next time we join you online, it's goodbye from the Arctic. Bye bye.